Phoena's Quest, Book 1, First Spark, by Chrissy Garwood. Chapter 14, Drifting. Phoena opened her eyes. Her whole body ached. She drifted with her arms outstretched. Those lifeless limbs were unresponsive. She still looked down at the river bottom. Her floating petticoat had bunched around her knees. For a moment she forgot that she could breathe underwater, and she imagined she had drowned. Her galloping heart insisted she was still alive. It took a long time before she was calm again. Wherever she was, it was harder to make out the details of her surroundings. The silvery globe had left her. The current was slow. The murky water tainted a muddy brown. She peered through the gloom. Silvery flashes came and went, lazy fish swimming this way and that. One bumped into her. With a gentle flip of its tail, it swam around her and continued on its way. Phoena could not follow it. A dark shape lifted from the mud below her. A momentary glimmer convinced her that this was her magic mirror. She longed to hold it again. The mirror floated along beneath her. After a time, she imagined she could hear voices. She was unable to draw the mirror close enough to see what was happening, so she concentrated on listening. "Barapa, I'm bored." That sounded like Carillion. "Going fishing is the worst suggestion you've had." Phoena smiled as she drifted. The mirror was still tuned to the three friends. "You're only complaining because you're no good at it, Carillion." Carillion snorted. "You've only caught a single fish, and you had to let it go again because it was too small. If you weren't so stubborn, I could magic us to the market and buy enough fish to satisfy your pride." "It's not about the fish," Oramus interjected. "Good. The three of them were still together. It's about enjoying the fresh air and the sunshine." "Oramus, don't lecture me," Carillion said. "You haven't even got your hook wet." "There's plenty of time. I'm happy to sit here and listen to the two of you arguing." "Ha!" Carillion replied. "You're so far from the water, I'm beginning to think you're afraid." "I'm no more afraid than you are," Oramus said. A big splash followed his words. Clouds of mud swirled around her. "What?" Phoena tried to locate the site of the disturbance, but she was still unable to move. The clay particles clung to her face and went up her nose. "Ugh!" Phoena coughed. "Hey!" Barapa yelled. "Stop that! You'll scare away the fish." "Don't blame me," Carillion said. "Oramus is the one who jumped in the water. We have a good excuse now to pack up the fishing gear and go somewhere else." "We came fishing," Oramus said, to an accompanying series of splashes, "because we wanted to be away from the others without needing an explanation." "Which reminds me, Barapa," said Carillion, "I have to ask you where those annoying twins have gone. Their absence is notable. For as long as I've known you, they've shadowed your every move. What did you do to make them drop you? They've even swapped to a different dining table." "When we disappeared in pursuit of Phoena, they were stuck with 3 angry guardians. Lord Westonbrook told them to rethink their allegiance to me, He promised them dire consequences when we arrived. "It's been 3 days," Carillion said. "I haven't seen any dire consequences. But I'm thinking they've passed on those warnings to the rest of the 4th years. Oramus and I are also shunned. It's a shock to find myself excluded. Why else would I spend this half-day holiday with 2 outsiders like you? It might be bearable if either of you had anything interesting to say." "Why am I the one who always has to come up with something new to talk about?" Carillion said. "Humph," Barapa muttered. "There'd be plenty to talk about if either of you would answer my questions." A loud plop was the only response to Barapa's complaint. More of the same sound followed in rapid succession. As puffs of mud rose around her, Phoena realised some kind of projectile was being pelted into the river. "Carillion, stop throwing rocks into the water," Barapa shouted. "He's bored," Oramus said. "Try asking Carillion your most pressing questions now." The barrage continued. The water surrounding Phoena grew murkier by the minute. It became more difficult to breathe. Her mouth and nose were coated with particles of clay. In desperation, she tried to spit it out. "You're only trying to distract me," Barapa said, "but this time it's not going to work. I'll keep asking questions until you give me some acceptable answers. First, I want to know what happened to her." "What makes you think I know anything you haven't already ascertained for yourself? You've been trying to find her with your magic. So has Oramus. Why aren't you troubling him with your questions? He's even less likely to give me a straight answer than you." The only response was another barrage of rocks into the river. Phoena cried out with her mind for him to stop. The assault ceased without any further comment from above. Phoena was thankful, despite being uncertain whether she had influenced Carillion's actions. The conversation resumed after a few minutes. "I'm more concerned that Lord Westernbrook has used his magic," Oramus said, "and been unable to find her." "How do you know he hasn't found her?" Barapa asked. "We all saw him in the dining hall at breakfast. If she had been found, he'd be gone. What makes you so certain?" Oramus laughed harshly. "It's obvious. She's formed an emotional attachment to us. He's already decided that we are unsuitable companions for his goddaughter. As soon as he finds her, he'll magic her away to somewhere far from our wicked influence. He could have her locked in the guest wing." "I don't think his magic is strong enough to contain her," Carillion said. "You're only guessing," Barapa said. "It could be part of a plan to throw us off the trail." "If that was true, you wouldn't have that magic tracker stuck in the middle of your forehead. I only have your word that there is a tracker. Both Oramus and I can see it, and we've told you that we each have one too. Matron's magic is sticky and impossible to remove." There followed another long silence. A different kind of sound disrupted the water immediately above her. After a few moments, a baited metal hook appeared within her limited view. The sharp barbs floated towards her. When the hook drew near enough, it snagged the skin on her arm. She gasped. Tiny droplets of blood floated free to drift away on the current. "There's something on my line," Barapa said. A few moments later, the jagged metal pulled free. A sharp pain in her arm was matched by a pain in her heart. But then her hope was reborn. The current swirled and something snagged on her clothes. The tugging intensified and her petticoat responded. For a moment she rose in the direction of the surface. Her joy awakened, only to die again. The hook tore free. Her body was too heavy and the fabric too weak. I've lost it. I'll reel the line in and see if I've also lost my bait. There was a whispering sound above her. What's that on your hook? Carillion asked. It looks like a piece of fabric, Barapa replied. There must be something down there. Send Oramus in to look. He's already wet. Anything to keep you two quiet. If it's treasure, it's mine. There was another large splash. The clouds of mud stirred again. He must be coming closer, but she couldn't see him. If it's treasure, Carillion laughed, you have to share. We've agreed to work together, and this fishing trip is part of the deal. A bit further out, Barapa called. Careful, visibility is poor there. Phoena's anticipation arose. The pressure in her head intensified as the splashing disrupted the current. A dark shadow blotted out the dim light from above. Her heart leapt when she felt something bump against her. Oramus had arrived. He lifted her hand towards the surface. I'm here, her mind cried. Almost immediately his grip released her floating arm. A string of unfamiliar words burst from Oramus. She heard him in stereo, both from the mirror below and through the water above. His shadow retreated. No! Don't leave me here. What? Carillion asked. You've found something, Barapa said at the same time. I've found a body, Oramus said. Then pull it out, Barapa shouted. We have to see who it is. He already knows, cried Carillion, and she heard a second splash. He must be wading towards her. Oramus, don't leave her there. We have to get her out of the water. I've been praying that we would find her, but not like this, Oramus said. Oramus, snap out of it, Carillion said, seizing Phoena's body by the arms. If you don't move, I'm going to hit you. We can't leave her under the water. Take her legs. The pair heaved Phoena from the water. They dragged her up the riverbank, where they dropped her onto the green grass. Roll her over, Barapa shouted. What is wrong with the two of you? Unceremoniously, her body tumbled over to face the cloudless sky. Barapa came closer, peering at her face. Phoena blinked, and he shot backwards. What kind of magic is this? She stared at the three noblemen who stood over her. She couldn't breathe and her chest threatened to explode. Barapa struggled out of his ruffled jacket and draped it across her body. She's still alive. Quick, Carillion! Use your magic to take her back to the academy. She needs a healing spell. I don't trust myself. What if she activates my magic and we go somewhere? Oramus! No! Barapa screamed in frustration. You can't leave her to die. You have to do something. He pulled out a handkerchief and wiped at the clay that coated her face. She's turning blue. Why is she opening and closing her mouth like that fish you landed? Carillion asked. Oramus swore. Quick! Her mouth and nose are full of mud. She's suffocating. Hands rolled her onto her side. Someone was hitting her between the shoulder blades. Hard, repetitive shocks that hurt. Meanwhile, Barapa stuck his fingers in her mouth. He scooped out some of the mud. Phoena gagged. Water and mud spewed forth all over him. Her body experienced a series of savage spasms as she continued to cough and splutter. Finally, she took a deep breath. The shuddering stopped. All three noblemen were touching her, holding her on her side. "Once again, it's Barappa who found the solution," Carillion said. "Lady, we are so pleased to have you back with us. But if you continue to frighten me like that, my hair will be grey before my time." "When did you find out you were a water sprite?" Oramus asked. He was the first one to pull away from physical contact. "A water sprite?" Barappa asked, leaning back to stare at her in wonder. "But that's how can she be a water sprite and a fire affinity enchantress?" Carillion asked. Phoena struggled to a seated position and stared from face to face. She didn't know what a water sprite was and was about to ask. Oramus shushed her. "Don't speak. I need to bring my ideas into the open before I lose courage. Not a water sprite and fire affinity. I believe she is more powerful and mysterious than that. Our Lady is an elemental spirit." But that means—" Barappa's face drained of colour. Oramus nodded. "That means she has powers across all the magic domains. See how the mud still clings to her. Remember, whenever she took fright, she transported us deep within the earth. She can breathe underwater and bend it to her will. And we've all seen her make fire. And the golden sun she conjured up draws energy from the air," Carillion added. "No wonder Lord Westernbrook wanted her hidden away from the world," Barappa said. He took another step backward. Then he dropped down onto one knee and bowed his head to the ground in front of her. Oramus and Carillion stared at him before they both dropped down to join him. Dear listening reader, I hope you have enjoyed this latest chapter from the first book in the Phoena's Quest trilogy. This is a beta copy, and the text may change between now and the official publication date. If you have any questions or suggestions that would make this chapter easier to read, please let me know. In return for your help, I will include your name in the acknowledgements as part of the reader team. Chrissy.